This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency space. Today I've got part 2 of my conversation with Bram Cohen. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1, which was the Crypto Conversation podcast before this one, I do recommend that you listen to that podcast. Part 1 is actually one of my favourite podcasts to date. Bram is an eccentric, he's very smart and very opinionated, and he's a fascinating guy on many different levels. So in part 1 we talked about the peer-to-peer BitTorrent protocol that Bram created, and we talked about the impact of BitTorrent on the world. BitTorrent changed the way we understand copyright, how we consume content, how content is delivered, and he shared some stories from the early days of Bitcoin, and much more. Here's part 2. In part 2 of our conversation, which is today's podcast, Bram goes into detail about what he thinks are the flaws of the financial system, the limitations of Bitcoin, and how his new cryptocurrency project, Chia, hopes to build on the blueprint of Bitcoin. So as you'll hear, Chia is a cryptocurrency that instead of the energy-intensive proof of work consensus algorithm, Chia uses something called proof of space and time, meaning free hard disk space, to create a new Nakamoto-style consensus algorithm. Okay, so let's get into it. So we begin part 2 where part 1 left off, and be warned, just, the first part of today's podcast is a little bit dense as Bram gets into some detail on his views on the financial system, what a blockchain is, his views on Bitcoin mining, and why Bitcoin is not as decentralized as people think it is, or people would hope it would be. Anyway, stick with it. You'll learn something from what Bram has to say here. And then in the second half of today's podcast, Bram outlines his vision for Chia, a cryptocurrency with the same properties as Bitcoin, but without the enormous energy footprint. And of course, he wants it to have the ability to be decentralized. And to do that, he wants any individual who is interested to be able to contribute to the network by farming, which is the equivalent of mining. Let's get into it. We begin here. What I'd like you to do, Bram, what are the elegant parts of Bitcoin and what are the flaws? Go.
Okay, so here's the problem. Do you want a secure distributed database? Actually, maybe I should back up a couple levels here.
Please.
Let's say you want to fix the finance industry, right? Now, the finance industry is not good at their job. They're using technology from 100 years ago. It's really bad. But maybe not 100, maybe more like 50.
And there are humans involved as well, which of course is never a good thing.
Yeah. So you go and you look at something like, say, Visa, and you go, I can do something better than this. This is really not well done. And so engineers make this mistake if they just go and build something that is objectively better than Visa. And then they're like, okay, let's use it. And then they rapidly learn it's illegal for people to use it because you can't do banking unless you have a banking license. There is a good reason, a good, horrible reason, why no random schmuck is allowed to just go do banking. And the problem is, when you do transfers with other people, there's a trusted third party involved. And people are like, oh, well, why don't we just do a reputation system of these people, blah, blah, blah. That's been tried. Throughout the 1800s, we tried having a relatively unregulated banking sector. Now, the problem is a banker who's not very carefully vetted and regulated and with legal liability can just steal. And even if they can't steal, if they're allowed to leverage, they can just keep cranking up the amount of leverage, which will keep making them more money. And they can proclaim themselves a genius because they doubled revenues by doubling the amount of leverage. And this works great until the entire system is so leveraged up the wazoo that somebody sneezes and the whole thing explodes. And throughout the 1800s, it's happened every 10 to 15 years. There was a banking crisis on the scale of the one that we had in 2008, 2009. People decided this was a bad thing and put in banking regulations and federal deposit insurance and a bunch of other things. And then the problem stopped happening. And then banks worked great. And then people started deregulating banks. I mean, they weren't officially deregulating banks. There was this whole shadow banking system. of things that were technically speaking not banks, and banks were taking a lot of their leverage and obfuscating it by making it be futures rather than leverage, and managed to work around everything. There's a fair argument to be made that most of finance industry technology is really about obfuscating leverage to allow you to increase leverage despite regulatory rules. And that is something that's not good for society. That's not something you want to really encourage. So here's the problem. If you start loosening up these regulations, you don't get new technologists coming in building great stuff. You get scam artists coming in and screwing everyone over, because scam artists can release vaporware faster than technologists can release real technology. And this is actually a big problem in cryptocurrencies today. So here's the problem, is that you have a trusted third party. That's where this whole spiel is heading towards.
Okay, Bram, so that is a good summary of the history of the banking system, sure. But so where does Bitcoin come into this picture? You keep talking about the trusted third-party problem. So let's bring in the big bad Bitcoin blockchain, shall we? How are we fixing the trusted third-party problem?
So to fix the problem, you don't need to build something that looks better. You need to build something that doesn't have the trusted third party, which means you need a secure, decentralized database. Now, this sounds like a total oxymoron, right? Like, it's not too hard to have two of these three things, but having all three sounds totally impossible. How can we have a database where anyone in the world can join or leave at any time, and you don't trust anyone else really in this system, and yet you still have confidence that the state of the database is what you said? There's the problem. Satoshi, whoever Satoshi was, had an idea, had a wonderful, horrible idea, which was a blockchain. Here's the problem. You and I sit down together and we're discussing this database. There's this secure distributed database. So how do we figure out what the current state of the database is if we argue about it? We are in disagreement about the current state of the database. So the answer is there's this thing called a blockchain, which is the history of the database. That has a weight. There is a difficulty of creating it. There is a certain amount of blood, sweat, and tears that went into generating this thing that we can verify locally. And the rule is the heavier weight wins. So you and I sit down and we get into an argument what the current state is, and whoever it is that has the greater weight sends their version of the blockchain to the other person, who then goes and verifies, oh yeah, that's heavier than what I had, and they throw out their thing and accept the other person's thing. And generally speaking, this doesn't have reorgs, that doesn't have big changes. You're mostly just appending to the end is the goal of what you want to have actually happen. Now, this is a cute idea, but it creates a big problem. And here's where the real innovation of Bitcoin comes in, because proof of work was not a new idea at all. A proof of work is very, very obvious if you're a cryptographer. The question is, well, how do you get people to be incentivized to extend this chain? And so the answer there is you have mining. You are making a database. The database is going to keep track of tokens which have value, and you pay miners to extend the chain using the tokens that the database is keeping track of. And with that, you have invented an ecosystem around this secure distributed database that does actually work. Now, you have this problem that your replication strategy is everything goes everywhere. The only real semantics it supports are stopping double spends, and it supports, very few transactions as a result of these things. And you have warehouses full of computers burning electricity doing literally nothing. However, all that said, it does do what it claims. This does, in fact, create a secure distributed database. And that's kind of your toehold in to this thing that's actually an extremely important problem. And we do have these existing systems in the regular finance industry. The Fed wire system does not have a high transaction rate, but everything flows through it. So there is, in fact, huge, tremendous value in a extremely secure, extremely reliable database that only has very simple semantics and has very low throughput.
So really what we've established then, Bram, is that Satoshi has created a Bitcoin to solve the double spend problem, solve the trusted third party problem, and by using proof of work and this decentralized network, now we have Bitcoin tokens, or really what we have is a provable digital scarcity, right? But the cost of this is this very intense energy footprint through the proof of work consensus algorithm and all these miners. So, well, tell me from your perspective, what's the problem with the miners and the energy footprint?
Yeah, well, there's a couple big problems here. The energy footprint thing doesn't actually cause problems for Bitcoin day to day. It's pretty gross, but it doesn't cause issues that people who are in Bitcoin feel directly because, the problems of creating global pollution don't hurt the people doing the polluting. It hurts everybody else. However, there are some very immediate issues, which is Bitcoin is supposed to be decentralized. And really what you want is many, many participants to be involved. You want this huge splintered section of people moving the database forward. And that's not what's happening. You have a handful of entities who basically do all the mining because you get economies of scale in kind of two different ways. There are only a few places in the world where electricity is really cheap, and you have economies of scale on making the hardware, which is very specialized hardware for doing mining. So Satoshi originally had this vision that everyone would do mining based on CPUs.
Yes.
Leveraging the sunk cost of manufacturing the CPUs in the first place, which was kind of how it worked for a while. This is in the very early days. For some period of time, it did work this way. The problem is, as soon as you hit scale, two things kill you. Number one, the cost of power winds up being more than your CPU. And, retail power is way, way more expensive than wholesale power, which is in turn way more expensive than power that happens to be in an inconvenient location because there's some government program to make a dam that has no reason to be there and has lots of useless power coming out of it, or there's some corrupt petrostate where people are just outright stealing power and aren't even paying for it. So there winds up being very few entities who have a huge advantage there. And then on top of that, you have tremendous sunk cost in the world in CPUs that in some sense are being underutilized because almost all CPUs spend the vast, vast majority of the time sitting around waiting, doing not much of anything. However, custom hardware for doing mining completely obliterates general purpose hardware by like a factor of 10,000. And so people don't mine with general purpose hardware anymore. It's all with this custom hardware, and now you have tremendous economies of scale on doing a better job of manufacturing this particular hardware, which is another source of centralization in the system. So Bitcoin is nowhere near as decentralized as you would really like it to be for these two different reasons. So, and then obviously there's just the straightforward burning of power because most of the cost here is going into burning power. That is just bad for the world. So I have a fix for this, or an improvement. I'm not going to claim it's all things to all people, but something that definitely helps the situation. I swear this is not science fiction mumbo jumbo that I'm stating here. It's using proofs of space and time. It's difficult to make this work because Bitcoin already just barely works. And so moving off of it really requires threading a needle very, very carefully. You need to figure out some resource that's not CPU. Satoshi thought that these commodity CPUs would work and you could leverage the sunk cost of them. You need something else. And you don't have very many other options. But there is one that works, which is storage. Storage is much more commodity than CPUs. For any given operation you might want to do, custom hardware will always beat general purpose hardware for it. However, storage is storage, bits are bits. Anything that can do proof of space better than other things can is actually more useful as just a plain old hard drive. And so if you can make it so that the resource that you're using to do what is really the equivalent of mining, this isn't exactly mining, I call it farming. If you make it so that whatever's required to do this is just hard drives, then people aren't going to have a big advantage in terms of making custom hardware for it. And on top of that, you have this resource that's already out there. There's huge quantities of over-provisioned storage in the world. It's not as underutilized as CPUs are, except that utilizing a CPU requires using actual power. So that's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison. But there's huge amounts of over-provisioned storage capacity in the world, and there's ridiculous amounts of money just spent on raw storage happening all the time anyway. So if you could leverage that, that could provide you a huge amount of security, a huge security parameter, and it's already very decentralized. This is owned by lots and lots of different entities who happen to have over-provisioned storage, because everybody has storage for something. And it's not so wasteful because they already have it. So it's an improvement on the decentralization and waste problems that you have in Bitcoin. Decentralization problems in Bitcoin are actually much, much scarier than people realize.
Okay, understood. And I also just want to get a little bit more detail from you, or perhaps dig into your motivations in terms of your critique of Bitcoin from the perspective of its energy footprint. So from my point of view, I think one thing that's going to happen in the 2020s is the climate change narrative, or the green movement, whatever you want to call it. I think people are underestimating how much of an elephant in the room type problem this is for Bitcoiners. And I think at some point this decade, every industry is going to come under intense pressure to go green, and eventually consumers, voters, individuals, even governments may start to move against wasteful energy users. And this happens much quicker than people think. Look at what's happened with Tesla. Tesla was founded 10 years ago, and for the first 10 years, no one took Tesla seriously. And then in the last 6 months, the market has finally come round to, I think, Tesla's way of viewing the world and what's going to happen. And we've reached a tipping point now where EVs are going to accelerate, and that is just the future we're going to move towards. So what I'm saying is, I do think that if Bitcoin can't make visible moves to move towards some kind of sustainable mining, there could be an existential threat to the Bitcoin brand. That's my view. So I'd like to hear your view, Bram.
Well, the Bitcoin culture has become extremely, extremely attached to mining. They've dug in their heels. They've decided, no, mining is a good thing, that the actual value of Bitcoin that's created is exactly the value of all this mining that happens. And if you take away the waste, you are removing value of Bitcoin, which is hilarious because these are a bunch of people who claim to be uber libertarians, and they are literally reciting and lecturing people about Marx's theory of value, like Marx's labor theory of value. And of course, the miners who do have some amount of sway would never want to move off of Bitcoin's consensus algorithm at all, because that's just removing all of their profits from this whole system. It's kind of weird because there have been some investors who they don't want to quite say this because they don't want to appear to be assholes. But there's a lot of them being turned off by my company having a green story, because they're like, no, trying to save the earth is for pussies. Like, this shows that you're not serious about doing real business because you're trying to do good for the world. And improving the environment is all a climate change hoax by conspiracy by climate scientists across the world or something like that. I don't know. There's a lot of vice signaling going on from these people.
There is, yes.
Bitcoin development is extremely conservative on top of that. So I don't think Bitcoin is going to change their mining algorithms, definitely not within the next 10 years, and most likely not ever.
I've seen some estimates, and I'm not sure if they're accurate or not, but I've seen some estimates that suggest that Bitcoin mining, around 75% of it may be using renewable energy sources. What if there's a complete shift to renewable energy sources? Do you think that's achievable?
It doesn't really... There's this fallacy that people have, that there aren't offsets happening, right? Like, if you have things that are producing a certain amount of power, if you take some of that power and shuffle it off to one thing, then that reduces the supply of power to everything else and is going to increase demand for other power sources happening out there. The green energy we're talking about here is really just tidal and dams. And there are only certain specific places that can do that. And they're a little bit inconveniently located, so it's relatively convenient to mine Bitcoin there. And also you have geothermal in Iceland, and you have a lot of power in this place where people don't really need it there. So usually a lot of that power is used to smelt aluminum and generate, because aluminum is made out of just any rock at all, because aluminum is 14% of the Earth's crust. But it's energy intensive to extract. Same for titanium, actually. Fertilizer is literally made out of the air. So those are things that you can use to just take this power and just make it something that you can store and ship around and stuff. Bitcoin mining is another thing kind of like that. But if you start Bitcoin mining in Iceland, this means that the price of Aluminum is going to go up, which means that people are going to start smelting aluminum elsewhere, which means that pollution is going to be happening in those places. And because what we're really talking about here is carbon dioxide, it doesn't matter where the carbon dioxide is getting emitted in the world. Now, this isn't 100% offsets everywhere, but still, even using a lot of green renewable energy is a huge problem. Now, I am a big proponent of nuclear power. I think thorium-based molten salt reactors in particular are really great technology that I think is the right way of solving the power problem in general. And we should be going to green things. Still, what the problem we have today is where power is really coming from right now is burning coal. So everything we can do right now to get off of that immediately is a good thing.
Well, Bram, let's go to a very quick break, and then after the break, let's outline your vision for Chia. We'll be back in 30 seconds.
Whether you're an enterprise fund manager or a retail trader, buying and selling cryptocurrencies successfully requires price discovery you can rely on. Brave New Coin's liquid indices provide trusted US dollar prices for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple. Featuring end-of-day or intraday outputs, you can count on the BLX, ELX, and XRPLX for accurate US dollar pricing for smart contract oracles, settlement price discovery, net asset valuation, and performance analysis. Visit bravenewcoin.com to find out more.
All right, Bram, so you have alluded to it. You have talked about it a little bit already, but so let's just start at the beginning. So what is Chia, and when did you start working on it?
So Chia is my new cryptocurrency project, and I started working on it in 2017.
What's your high-level summary of Chia?
The high-level summary of Chia is, well, it's kind of ground up, redoing everything. Let's do things right. Take Bitcoin as it is, because there's a lot of work that's been put into Bitcoin and people have learned a lot of lessons working on it, and we don't want to repeat any of the same mistakes, but take all the lessons learned from it and what's been done with it and that knowledge. Let's build a cryptocurrency where we're doing everything right. And aside from all the little details on like the protocol level and stuff, of which there are many, many cleanups, there are two big high-level features here that are very big things. Number one is the new consensus algorithm based on proofs of space and time, which is a concept that actually I personally came up with. And I actually invented the proof of space we're using, and the proofs of time came from a bunch of our advisors and some other people. And that makes it so that the actual moving forward of the system is much less wasteful and much more distributed. And then on the other side, in terms of things that are big and new, and this is something that has a much more immediate practical benefit, is that we have a new on-chain programming environment, which is based on the way Bitcoin does things. It works in what is called the UTXO model. The UTXO model is really designed to make it so that when you're running a full node, when you're validating the history, the database of what you have to keep is very, very simple and easy to reason about. And when you have smart transactions, it's easy to figure out what they actually do. It's so simplified in how it does it. It looks like you can't really do much of anything, but it turns out by just doing some subtle cleanups here, there, and everywhere, and a couple of clever programming tricks that people hadn't figured out before, you have just a really, really powerful system there that's actually more powerful than the much more naively made systems. So if you're comparing to something like Solidity, Solidity was done by people who didn't know any better and weren't really familiar with writing of smart transactions and just did the whole, like, I'm just going to write a computer kind of a thing. And people don't realize how poorly engineered Solidity is. But beyond just the basic, the details of it being poorly done, it also has this tremendously complicated on-chain state, which makes it extremely difficult to reason about what's going on and very, very expensive to synchronize to the Ethereum blockchain. And very fiddly. It's very easy to get it wrong and have a consensus failure.
So, Bram, effectively you're saying that what you and presumably your team are doing, you're leveraging the last 10 years of blockchain. You've looked at what Bitcoin and Ethereum have done right and what they've done wrong, and you're seeking to take those learnings and try and do something that achieves the same decentralization and smart contract, all the benefits, but without some of the problems.
Yeah, there's a couple of big new ideas that aren't in the literature. Well, I mean, they are because we published them, but things that we've come up with. But then an awful lot of stuff is very, very recognizable if you're familiar to Bitcoin. We have, we call them by different names, but we have UTXOs, which we call coins. We have full nodes. We have wallets that we're using Neutrino for our wallet protocol. Everything looks like you would expect if you are a Bitcoin developer. It's just sort of like all the details are subtly different.
That's right. And of course, you have a green paper. I like that you've called it green paper. That is published on your website. And all links to all of this will be in the show notes.
Yeah.
Talk me through where we're actually at with Chia, Bram, because you have been working on it for a while. You have, I think you've launched a test net. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, we have a test net launched. It's in alpha right now. So there's a test net launched. You can run farmers on it. You can run full nodes. There's no transactions yet. You just get sort of bragging rights for how many blocks you made. And you can also run time lords. That's the term for the proof of time servers. There's a little bit of a funny dynamic with time lords that only the very, very fastest one actually spits out the things because it's a canonical calculation you have to do that doesn't vary based on who does it. And we've done a pretty good job of making reasonably fast ones. But if somebody overclocks a machine, they can start running the authoritative Time Lord that's finding every single one of those things.
Bram, for those of us who aren't network engineers ourselves, can you explain how this would work for the general listeners? So, you talked about before about the threat of Bitcoin mining being centralized. And of course, Satoshi's vision originally was for any individual with a computer effectively to be able to contribute and mine. And of course, that is not really possible in today's world. So how does that work then in terms of what you're doing with what you call proof of space and proof of time? So how would the individual at home with their computer, how would they use their hard disk space to become a farmer? What does that look like?
Okay, so at a high level, if you want to run a farmer, the way it looks to you is you download our software and you make what we call plots. You make these special files on your hard drive that aren't useful for anything other than farming. And then you sit there either talking to a full node, or really you should run a full node yourself. And you just start getting to claim that you created blocks. You're contributing to the blockchain that's growing. The proportion of all blocks that you make is exactly proportional to the proportion of plotting space in the world that you have allocated. So if you double the amount of space that you use for your plot files, this doubles roughly, slightly less than, doubles the amount of blocks that you will create. Once our testnet hits beta, then you'll actually start getting rewarded directly with testnet tokens. And once our mainnet launches, actually because it requires almost no resources to actually do the farming process, like as long as your computer is turned on, basically, you can just be doing these lookups on your hard drive and your computer will never notice the difference in terms of resources that it's using. We're going to make it so that the software will seamlessly go from running testnet to running mainnet. It can actually run both at once on the same plot. So it's going to default to automatically doing that when the time comes when we release our mainnet. You can also run a full node if you want. That means pretty much the same thing as it does in Bitcoin. There's this other thing that's in the system. This is a bit technical and subtle, but it's kind of interesting. Proofs of space are not the only thing here. They're kind of the hero of the show. They're the main important ingredient. They're the clams and the clam chowder. However, in order to make proofs of space secure, you have a whole lot of different kinds of attacks on them where, because you made it not really cost anything to farm, you have what are called grinding attacks, where you just do lots and lots of lookups. You try out every possible version of the history as it goes forward and just pick out whichever one works best for you. And now you are leveraging using extra computational power to get more out of your space, which is not how it's supposed to go. You want it to not only not require this, you want it to not be possible to make this happen in order for this to be a good consensus algorithm. So it turns out this can be done, and our green paper is all about this, if you mix together proofs of space and proofs of time. So the basic idea is the better a proof of space is, the shorter a proof of time needs to be done afterwards to complete it. And this makes it so that you can, for example, if you try and make an alternative history, because you have a lot more space than the blockchain historically had, you can make a blockchain that will, up to the current time, have greater weight than the blockchain that actually happened, than the legitimate one. But by the time you catch up to the current time, the legitimate chain is going to have extended forward even more than the amount that you caught up because you have less resources. So there are these things called proofs of time that are very important for securing the system. Servers that generate proofs of time are called time lords. The way those work is when people make proofs of space, they're just broadcast out to everyone. The best proofs of space are broadcast out to everyone. And whichever time lords are out there will somewhat altruistically, they're kind of like full nodes, just run on the best ones that they see and complete them and announce those for the entire, the proofs of time for the entire network, which will then start the next block moving forwards.
Is Time Lord a reference to Doctor Who?
Yes.
Gotta love Doctor Who. The TARDIS and the Time Lords. Yes. All right. Well, the thing is, though, Bram, so the advantage that Bitcoin had, right, was, Bitcoin had the perfect conception, right? No one really knew what was happening, and so you only get a chance to do that once. What's your plan for actually releasing the Chia tokens? How can you get them? How many are there? At a high level, again, what is the economic model for Chia? Is the end use of Chia as a medium of exchange? Is it a store of value? Is it a smart contract token? What's the economic vision here?
That's a whole lot of questions.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay, so let me start with what the vision is. Of why is this worth doing? What does this really accomplish? Like I said, your big practical thing that's really better is the on-chain programming environment. And the thing that Chia is really good for is money. And so when you talk about means of transfer and store of value, those aren't different things. They're all aspects of money, and they all go together. Something can't be good at one of them without being good at the others. And in order to be better money, we're really focusing on, there's actually kind of two big things we're focusing on, but we're focusing very much on money use cases. So when you're using Bitcoin, it feels like you're carrying around wads of $100 bills. And this is really sketchy. So we're making it so that you can have smart wallets which have on-chain enforcement of much more secure processes. So things like having a wallet which can only pay out to authorized payees. So if you have a company that has an employee that it can make out payments, you don't want them getting phished and you don't want them embezzling money. So you just make it so that they can only pay to entities who you gave them permission to pay money to out of the wallet that they have access to. Make it so that you have a rate limited wallet. So it can spend money, but only at a certain rate. And if it gets hacked, you can claw all the funds back. You can notice, oops, I've been hacked. I'm going to reclaim all the funds that haven't been withdrawn by whoever hacked it so far. And that's actually, a smart transaction that's actually enforcing this on the blockchain. And that one, the really neat feature of that one actually is it's set up. We have implemented already that when you send payments into it, it's enforcing that it's actually going into this one wallet, which has an interesting programmatic nuance there, because there's a potential attack where someone makes two copies of the wallet and accepts payments into the two copies, and now they can spend twice as fast as they're supposed to be able to. So that's another use case. We have a bunch of things like that, all these money use case kind of things. And these are things that banks do for you, but banks do it in a way that's not very transparent, that you as a user have no control over whatsoever. And they're not super great at it. But these are services that banks do for you, and they do it better than Bitcoin does, but they do it worse than you actually can do with cryptocurrencies in principle, where if you do it right, now this has full end user control and completely transparent and complete flexibility, that if somebody wants to have a slightly different process or mix and match these features, they can just go ahead and implement that. Or a software developer can go ahead and implement that and enable them to use like combinations of these features.
How will you release the Chia tokens initially?
The short answer is if you want to get your hands on Chia tokens, you should farm. You can go and get prepared for that now and be all set and ready, get your plots done before our mainnet launch, and then you will be getting Chia tokens for that. And the more plotting you do, the more tokens you're going to get. And we're going to have a period of time in which there's no transactions. There's just farming rewards so that people have some Chia out there before like trading actually starts.
So when trading starts, will Chia be available on exchanges?
We will be listed on exchanges immediately. We're already very much in talks with exchanges about that. The other part of this is Chia, the company, is going to have a significant pre-farm because you need money to fund ongoing development and actually make this happen. That's not a founder's reward. That's not owned by me and employees. That's actually owned by the company, and we're equity holders in the company. And the pre-farm is going to be subjects to lockups that are enforced on the blockchain that other people can audit. So people can tell we're not just going to be dumping tons and tons of Chia on the market.
So a pre-farm is the equivalent of a pre-mine.
Yes.
People are rightly skeptical of pre-mines, and look, I mean, sure, if you can do it the right way and stay accountable.
Yeah. Oh man, the feedback, some of the feedback I've gotten from potential investors is so sketchy. It's like, oh, we don't like this whole equity thing you're talking about. We just want the tokens. Like basically, like give us a bunch of tokens so we can like spend them all.
Well, look. Speaking of investors, you do have some quite interesting investors behind you, Bram. So I think Naval Ravikant led a seed round and raised $3.4 million. I think Andreessen Horowitz was included there. Can you speak to what that was like and why the likes of Naval and Andreessen are interested in what you're doing?
Well, the time you're talking about was very, very early, and that was really them believing in me, someone who knew what he was doing. So, okay, we'll put seed money into this, whatever it is. We think Bram knows what he's doing. We're much, much farther along now. We've launched our testnet. We've released our on-chain programming environment as a library and several smart transactions for it. We're about to release more smart transactions for it, including colored coins that are actually much, much more powerful than Ethereum colored coins are. And we're going to release our beta where we're going to have actual smart transactions on our blockchain. That's coming up very soon. Market's not as hot as it was when we raised our seed round. And unfortunately, a lot of chumps have given everything a bad reputation. There are a bunch of people who, like I said before about scam artists can release vaporware a lot faster than real technologists can release real technology. There are a lot of people who raised a whole bunch of money who, like, to put it bluntly, don't possess the technical chops to actually even deliver a product at all. And they're not doing it. And some of them raised truly ridiculous amounts of money. And they're really giving the industry a bad reputation.
Of course. Yeah. 90% of ICO projects. Okay. I love it how you said that Naval and Andreessen, they probably just said, oh, look, Bram's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. Let's just give him a little bit of money so he can. I think it would be almost like just as a hedge against their Bitcoin and Ethereum positions. They would be thinking like, well, just in case Bram has this crazy idea and he knows what he's doing, we better just, back him just in case. Do you think that's accurate?
I think there was a little bit of a more proactive belief in me than that.
Sure.
I would hope.
Yes.
But a lot of my plan sounds like a crazy plan, and it's super, super technical. So if you're applying the filter of does what this person is saying sound like a bunch of crazy science fiction, what I say sounds like a lot of what other people talk about as well, if you don't have the chops to get into a really, really technical deep dive. Now, if you are super technical, you can go read a bunch of our papers and our green paper and our on-chain programming environment and say, wow, this is really amazing stuff. But not very many people possess the chops to really sit down and dive through all that stuff. No, they don't, Bram. Here's the problem, right? So even if what you say is true, and look, it's not even about science fiction, and obviously I love science fiction, but cryptocurrency is science fiction. That's why we're here. It's exciting. But I have no doubt that you know exactly what you're doing. You've done this all your life. You're a very talented coder, programmer, engineer, all that stuff.
But it's one thing to say that you've invented a protocol that is better than Bitcoin, but the problem is, how do you get users? How do you scale it? How do you get people interested? That's that's almost the hard part. So talk to me about what that would look like. How do you overcome Bitcoin's brand, the Lindy effect of Bitcoin? How can Chia get traction, do you think?
I have 4 answers to that of things which we can do really well, starting from most compelling and differentiated from Bitcoin, going down to least. So top of the list, I believe, actually is colored coins. If you want to do some kind of token launch, doing this in Chia is extremely lightweight. You just go ahead and do it, and extremely parameterizable. You can have essentially any rules you want about how these tokens get created. And it supports inner smart transactions. So like in Ethereum ERC20 tokens, they're just accounts, where in Chia, these inner smart transactions of the colored coins you can write vaults in them. They have all the same kind of power as Chia coins themselves do. And on top of that, we've actually implemented non-interactive aggregation, which makes it so that you can, for example, if you want to make an offer to the world to trade Chia for a colored coin, you actually make an unfinished transaction that burns Chia into nothing and prints colored coins out of the ether. And then you just post this on like Reddit or wherever. And then anyone else in the world can actually make the other half of this transaction. And it will now be a valid transaction and get accepted to the blockchain. And you and this other person who you didn't directly coordinate with have now swapped Chia for the colored coin with each other. So our colored coins really offer a lot of very compelling features that other things don't as a programming environment.
Okay, that's number 1. You said you had 4 points. That was number 1, colored coins. What's the second?
Second one would be just use as money, just use in terms of just doing transfers and things, that we offer much better security features in terms of not feeling like you just have this suitcase full of $100 bills that you need to secure somehow. And also we're going to be liquidity providers to this system. We're going to be lending out Chia, but we're not going to be dumping it. So it will be possible to get Chia and move it around, and there will be actual liquidity in the system on top of it being really nice and secure.
Okay, that's number 2. What's number 3, Bram?
Number 3, these are much less big than the first 2, but we're going to have distributed identity. This is something people are building on top of Bitcoin as well, but the idea being that if you lose your credentials, either because you lost them or you got hacked, those are actually 2 somewhat different use cases, you have given other entities the ability to recover access to your wallet. A thing that we're going to implement soon is making it so that this is tied to their identity, not giving them credentials right now. So that even if they have had to go through a recovery process themselves to regain access to their wallet, that they can still participate in this recovery of your wallet.
Fantastic. And number 4?
Number 4, and like I said, this is the least compelling of these, is for timestamping. We have multiple options of how you go about doing timestamping. Because we have our proofs of time, you can actually do it off of iterations of that, which is in some ways more precise.
I want to finish off, Bram, and take you through the very famous Crypto Conversation hot take round, and we'll do that very soon. But just before we do that, I just want to cover off a couple of very quick questions, and I just want your quick answers here. So number 1 is, what is the time frame on mainnet launch, or where are we at with Chia? What's the time frame?
The time frame we're planning on is mainnet launch around the end of this year.
Okay, great.
And we are heading towards launch of our beta, where you can really, really play around with it around the beginning of April.
Excellent. And finally, Bram, just before we go to another quick break, answer this in any way you want, but where do you think we are in terms of, if you kind of zoom out a bit, in terms of the internet and the underlying protocols, Web 3.0, whatever you want to call it, where are we going at the moment? Where are we and where are we going? Love to get your thoughts.
Well, I can tell you what's not happening. We're not going to see on-chain scaling. That's not going to be a thing. It annoys me at people claiming that they have some great new tech solution of doing on-chain scaling. And we know what the trade-offs of on-chain scaling are. they make it incredibly expensive to run a full node, and it's a bad idea. I think we're going to see cryptocurrencies just kind of get better. We're going to see them get more polished and improved, and I'm planning on Chia being very central to that. But they're going to do what they're good at, which is doing money type stuff, moving value around and securing it.
So if on-chain scaling is going to be difficult, so what about second layer protocols like the Lightning Network?
Yeah. You want payment channel networks to be running everything. That's where it really has to go in the end. And that's what banks do. I was talking about the Fedwire system. Fedwire can't support a huge number of transactions, but it runs the whole banking system. So it's kind of like the blockchain is like Fedwire, and like a payment channel network would be like interbank net settlement systems. And it's not clear if end users will at the end of the day be actually hitting these things directly, or actually have kind of like accounts at bank-like things that they're using, which are then in turn doing net settlement, because that can really scale up a lot and doesn't require a huge amount of trust. But in terms of big exciting things for the world, I think the thing that you might really see happen would be some countries where they just don't have effective local currency that actually works. Right now, they mostly use dollars or try to use dollars. I think in the future, the thing where people will really see cryptocurrencies is they're going to start using cryptocurrencies instead of dollars.
Very nicely said, Bram. All right, well, let's leave it there. Let's go to a very quick break, and then I'll be excited to take you through the Crypto Conversation hot take round.
Hey there, you Crypto Conversation fans. My name is Brian Krogsgaard, and in combination with Josh Olszewicz, we record LedgerCast, a weekly podcast all about cryptocurrency trading. It's a little different than what Andy's got going on here with the Crypto Conversation podcast, where he's interviewing folks, and we think that you would enjoy it if you like this. It's also brought to you in partnership with Brave New Coin, and I hope to see you soon. Just go to ledgerstatus.com to check it out, or search for it on your favorite podcast player.
Okay, I'm with Bram Cohen. He is the inventor of the BitTorrent protocol, and he is the founder of the Chia cryptocurrency project. So, Bram, I like to finish each Crypto Conversation podcast with a rapid-fire round of Crypto Conversation hot takes. Are you up for it?
Yes, I am.
I want your hot takes, your hot fire. Take your best shot. Here we go. Bram, where do you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-coin opportunist spectrum?
Well, obviously, because I'm making my own cryptocurrency, I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist, but I think my cryptocurrency that I'm making is very, very true to Bitcoin.
Fantastic. All right, Bram, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
The firmest conviction is there is no substitute for Nakamoto consensus. Like, if it doesn't have Nakamoto consensus, it's not a real cryptocurrency.
I love it. Bram, I ask every guest this question. Who do you think wins the American presidential election 2020?
If we elected the president by popular vote, it would be overwhelmingly likely that some Democrat would win it. However, we have the Electoral College, so it's kind of 50-50 at this point, whether it's going to be Trump or a Democrat.
Well, and Andrew Yang has dropped out of the race, but I have been asking this question, and I think it's an interesting one. So UBI, Universal Basic Income, as a potential fix for AI-induced automation, even on a long enough time frame. Do you think this is a good idea?
I don't think machines taking away our jobs is a huge problem. Having automation comes in, makes people more productive and makes society more productive, and actually makes people get better jobs because they start doing more rewarding activities for work and not the things that have been automated. However, universal basic income can serve two other things. It can make the welfare system more streamlined and efficient and better at its job, and it can also increase the size of the welfare system. So at the scale that Yang has talked about, straight up increasing it without putting in offsets of increasing taxes would actually be extremely a big ask in terms of just paying for it. But if you were to do it where you do this like everyone gets some amount of money every month, but the tax code is very simplified in that the lower end things are paying a much higher rate of taxes than they are currently, and people making like, I don't know, $50,000 or $100,000 or something, wind up break even with where they would have been before this, that is very compelling in terms of not making weird disincentives to work.
Yes, indeed. All right, Bram. Well, Bill Gates famously said that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. What does the blockchain space look like in 10 years' time?
10 years is a long way out. We might be seeing a country or territory in the world be on a cryptocurrency instead of any government-issued currency as the standard thing that they use. And we might see widespread deployment of payment channel network.
All right, Bram. Well, William Gibson said the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people just aren't really aware of it?
Oh, young people have no idea what the world used to look like. It used to be that like telepathy was considered a magical superpower for characters in sci-fi fantasy things. And now it's like telepathy. We have telepathy. I have my phone. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. It's like what Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right?
Yeah.
Let's zoom out, Bram. What is the long-term future for the human race? Do you see dystopia or utopia?
There's this kind of really prosaic observation that technology is progressing super, super quickly, and that at some point our technology will surpass our accidentally evolved brains. There's a question of when this will happen, and will this be a good or a bad thing? I feel optimistic. I see technology as really having improved the lives of people around the world extremely rapidly within my own lifetime. And I think this day of discomfort of us humans being obsolete or obsolete-ish, or maybe one generation is obsolete but their children aren't, or something like that, I think that's hundreds of years in the future.
Yeah, well, I hope we make it 100 or 200 or 500 years into the future. We'll just have to see. But finally, Bram, what is your favorite science fiction book, film, show, or universe?
Oh, man. Science fiction meant more to me when I was much younger. But I recently watched The Boys, which I really loved.
Yeah, The Boys on Amazon. Yeah, that was fantastic, wasn't it? I enjoyed that. So naughty, so naughty. All right. Well, Bram, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for talking to me today. The microphone is yours. Take us out of here. Tell the people what they need to know about Chia, where they can find you, and what they should do. Take it away.
So if you want to know more about Chia, you can go to chia.net. There's information there, and you can download it and try it yourself, and lots of supporting documentation. If you want to follow me, I'm Bram Cohen on Twitter, and you can follow me there.
Fantastic. And of course, links to everything and anything we talked about today. If it was interesting and exciting, I'm going to put a link to that stuff in the show notes. Hey, Bram, thank you. This was a real pleasure. All the best to my man.
Thank you.
Boom. And we are done. So what did you think of all that? Do you think Bram has a point? Is Bitcoin too centralized? Does Chia provide a credible alternative? I don't know, but I do think it is very hard to overcome the Lindy effect and the network effects of Bitcoin. I do think it's good that people like Bram continue to critique Bitcoin and present possible alternatives, as that also contributes to Bitcoin's anti-fragility. As I said, everything that we discussed, links to all of that are in the show notes. Shout out to Brian and Josh from the Legistatus podcast. You would have heard an ad from Brian there. If you did enjoy the show, please do make sure you subscribe to the Crypto Conversation podcast in whatever podcast app you are using. That way you'll know when each new weekly episode drops. Also, please do consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a nice review in the Apple Podcast app or on iTunes. Okay, we'll leave it there. That's all for today. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave a New Coin. Boom. Check the room.